Hello, Martians. Now, I know that we were supposed to be doing this out and about, but it just, you know what?
Busy, busy.
That's right. I just got way too much on. And I'm actually doing interviews now. I did an interview today, which was a fishing interview with a fisherman in British Columbia. And that was really, really cool. This is actually cool. If fishing can get intellectual, it was a very intellectual conversation. So
that's pretty neat.
It is. It is. Now, Martians, we need to talk. We need to talk specifically about Doctor Who. And we need to talk specifically about Genesis of the Daleks. Because, let's face it, there is only ever one conversation that's really had around Doctor Who. Well, that was a shit episode. Or, oh my god, I'm going to fangirl because that was the best episode ever. We don't generally really engage with the content. So while you have Star Trek, which does this great in-depth philosophical discussion over every single episode, well, at least a good portion of the episodes, especially if they have Jean-Luc Picard in them. That is not at all the case with Doctor Who. There are almost no philosophical discussions ever to be had. I don't know whether you've noticed that, Phoenix?
Well, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts and that sort of thing, but I have noticed that just on other mediums, where anytime I see Doctor Who shit, it's just, oh, look at this amazing thing, or look at this in-joke we have in the fandom. No real actual deconstructing of things.
Exactly. So
I think the closest I came was like this discussion about the silence creatures. Like, have you ever tripped on thin air? That's what happens when, like, the whole signal thing, when you watch the video and you're told to kill them all, like, tripping over thin air is actually just tripping over one of their bodies, and you don't remember, and that's about as close to in-depth as it gets.
Yeah, and look, and that's hardly what I would call an in-depth philosophical discussion. That again, that's just the standard fandom. And this is something that I really don't quite understand, because Doctor Who was originally intended to be an educational show and to engage kids in science. It was not intended, well, I mean, it always has been entertainment, but it was not being. It was intended to actually provoke discussion to a large degree, because they explored historical topics. Obviously, you had monsters, but you know that's just part and parcel of it. But it was actually meant to be something that engaged an audience. So we get to Genesis of the Daleks, which is obviously the origin of the Daleks. And one of the things which just totally and utterly pisses me off about Genesis of the Daleks is that all of the discussion around Genesis of the Daleks is, well, you know, Terry Nation did blah, 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 and this, da, 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 da. Nobody actually gets down to the tin tacks of, hey, this is actually a really, really in-depth transhumanist story, and this is really the story of what happens when you take transhumanism to its logical conclusion, re-engineering an entire species into lumps of hateful flesh. And I prefer thinking about the whole Genesis of the Daleks thing, and in fact Daleks in full stop, in that way of these are just lumps of hateful flesh. Because when you think about the Daleks, you think about the pepper pots, you think about the robotic voices, you forget that there's a creature inside. And there are two key points about transhumanism that I think the Genesis of the Daleks really, really nails. First, when you look at the reasons for creating the Khaled mutants that become Daleks, their reasoning is that the world that they're on is now so polluted due to 1,000 years of war that they've got to go and create this whole new form for the species to survive, because as it is, they will not survive. So that's part one, which frankly, that is not an unreasonable reason to go down the transhumanist line. You know, there's a need. Our species will die out, so that. The second part is that it acknowledges something that we kind of talked about in our last episode of Transhumanism when we talked Ghost in the Shell, and that is that it is really, really difficult to see biology delivering transhumanism all by itself. That ultimately you've got to get some cybernetics in there somewhere, and the Daleks essentially admits that straight up. So first of all, you create these hateful lumps of flesh, and then you have to
put it in a super tank.
You have to put it in a tank because it's got to be able to defend itself. You know, they created this thing that, you know, was hard to poison, wouldn't suffer from radiation. So they got the biology right, but then they went, this creature that is, you know, resistant to radiation, resistant to poison, resistant to all these awful things, then needs to be able to look after itself, needs to be able to get around, obviously needs to be able to defend itself. So the actual Dalek machine makes sense. And that's the thing that really, really kind of annoys me about Doctor Who, is that very, very few of the discussions look at, you know what, Doctor Who, at various points in time, really does get into the heart of topics. It's just that gets really, really skipped over in favour of other, you know, much more mundane discussions over, you know, writing styles and acting and, you know, props and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've listened to any number of podcasts and I've almost heard, well, in fact, I have not yet heard anybody engage with the actual themes and topics that are often discussed within Doctor Who, as opposed to the content. Which,
I suppose that's what makes us unique.
Well, it is, but it also makes me wonder quite why that is. Why the subject matter of Doctor Who is not worthy of discussion in depth, and yet the TARDIS, the, you know, companions, the, oh my god, you know, the Doctor wasn't, or the actor of the Doctor was just not on point this episode. Like, why those things are worthy of discussion and not actually
totally
engaging with the subject matter. Now, okay, granted, I don't think that there is any way that you can engage with the subject matter of, say, the Horns of Nymon and end up in a great place. I will admit that. But when it comes down to it, Genesis of the Daleks absolutely rocks as a story, and it really explores transhumanism in a serious way, and it kind of frustrates me that the Daleks are never ever taken this seriously again. And, you know, occasionally they take the Daleks seriously, but bottom line is that they don't they're the scary monster. They are not the mutant space Nazis that originally were created. And there is a difference between the monster and the mutated space Nazis, because the mutated space Nazis come with a rationale and a reason for existence, whereas the monster is just there to scare you. And I think that's why Doctor Who and the makers of Doctor Who often don't get it right. I think, and this is why I think, say, the Philip Hinchcliffe era, he got it right in terms of doing it, is because he didn't just treat the various parts of Doctor Who as, oh, well, this is the monster and this is that. He actually looked through all of the parts that made up the story and went, okay, now we've got to tell this in a way that makes, not only makes sense, but makes logical sense within its own right. And that's something that I don't think modern Who writers do. Modern Who writers focus in on the scary monster, which is why we have these ridiculous debates over whether Blink is the best episode in history and all that kind of stuff. And then, like, this episode gets pushed down the list, and yet this is actually real science fiction. This is not just real science fiction as in a little bit real. This is hardcore science fiction. Really having a very serious discussion around that. And, you know, just how far do we take transhumanism? What is the logical endpoint? And, you know, would we be prepared to go down the line of the Daleks? Is there somebody out there who would be prepared to go down the line of the Daleks, as in pushing that genetics to the absolute limit? And I have to say that, you know, let's face it, this is something that the Nazis were actually kind of in their own way aiming for, you know, with their super race and stuff like that. There is not that much difference between what necessarily the Nazis were trying to achieve, although via a different way, and where the Daleks ends up. So it's not an irrelevant piece of discussion. It is actually a very relevant piece of discussion. So that's my take on Genesis of the Daleks. I thought it was fantastic. What did you think, Phoenix? Did you actually enjoy the story?
Yeah, I did. I don't know why, but I really enjoy most of the classic Who. Even though it's sort of old style filming and whatnot, and of a different era, I do enjoy watching old Who. So I had no problem with it.
Well, I think as long as Doctor Who avoids just falling into the trap of, oh my god, there's a monster and you've got to have a monster, and it actually works through the internal logic of, why does this exist? Why is this needed? And that was something that I think the earlier writers did. I think later writers didn't. Like, if you get into, say, Seventh Doctor territory, by the time you get to Sylvester McCoy, the internal logic of everything just goes out the window, and it's literally a case of, well, let's just stick these things together and hope that it looks cool or whatever. And that's not that. I'm not criticizing that. It's a different storytelling style, but certainly I think for the first 4 Doctors, at the very least, there was a much greater focusing on the internal logic and making sure that things, as often as possible, made sense. They didn't always achieve it, but then again, when you're looking as many episodes as these guys were making, with the technology that these guys were making, that they didn't achieve it always, I think that it's hard to be critical. Besides which, as we've said, we're engaging with the subject matter, not with the stylistic development of it. So I think that we can give that stuff a pass. At the end of the day,
honestly, I think
asking good
trying
questions.
to engage with the stylistic stuff, we're coming at it from a different kind of... We're coming from the future, not in the time it was made.
Exactly.
So our sort of what we value as good is very different to what would have been valued as good back then.
Well,
and,
I think that one of the things which I have observed in terms of that is, I think the way in which we have so many more surface discussions, which is about those surface stylistic or whatever things, rather than engaging with the subject matter itself, it says a lot about where we are at. We look at the surface stuff, and that's what we're after. We want the pretty surface stuff. We don't necessarily value in the same way that deeper stuff. Then again, of course, then you have a series that actually does get into some of that deeper stuff, and then all of a sudden people realize, oh my god, you can have that deeper stuff, and that is okay. A good example of that, I would suggest, would be something like Stranger Things, which does get into some of that deeper stuff. It also does have a little bit of that stylistic stuff as well, because it's deliberately aiming at... But I think, you know, for me, what I think science fiction should be focused in on the most part, I mean, I'm not saying that it should always, because entertainment is still an important part and will always be a big part of science fiction. But I think that, you know, science fiction should still seek to engage with the audience and introduce ideas, because that's what science fiction has always been about. And when I come back to Genesis of the Daleks absolutely introduces new ideas to people, because when you look at the way in which the Daleks come into being, the way that Davros thinks it through, and how that all works, that story is absolutely as good as any of the Star Trek stories that do a similar job. So it's hard to fault Doctor Who on that front. In fact, it's nice to see Doctor Who doing that sort of stuff. I would like to see Doctor Who doing a lot more of that stuff, because at this point we've got nothing. You know, the more engaging with the audience and making the audience think stuff. There are a couple of shows like Black Mirror, I think, is a good series that does make you think, but by and large science fiction has kind of ditched that for the special effects, and just give them some candy and they'll be fine. And I don't see that as necessarily a great development in overall in science fiction. I'd prefer to see science fiction engaging a lot more with some of the, you don't have to engage with deep issues every week, but certainly tackling some of these bigger topics and making people think. But we have what we have. Anyway, thank you, Phoenix.
That's okay.
Always good to catch up with you. Considering that we'll be catching up on Sunday, so we will do another episode on Sunday, and we are starting off into a new era on Sunday. We are going to do politics, and with our list, hey, come on, you got to admit, I did manage to get some good manga and anime into the list for this one. I think the balance between East and West is really, really good, because we've got 4 Western stories, we've got 4 Eastern stories, and then we've got a South African story just to balance everything out. Because I thought, you know what, I thought District 9 does do racism and that sort of segregation and stuff thing a lot better than most other stories that are done. And you know what, I think it's nice to have a different set of sensibilities in terms of the politics from the stock standard, oh my god, here's another American story, oh my god, here's another American story, oh my god, let's just mix this up with another American story. So we got 4 Japanese anime / mangas, and which we'll try and grab the animes as much as possible. And
yeah, I looked at all of them. It seems like they all have an anime.
They all have an anime.
Although one is a TV series that's a couple seasons long, I think.
Yeah.
I'd have to have a look.
Yeah, but I think that you'll agree that they do address a very different set of political issues to the Western stuff. So I thought that was really, really cool to be able to address that.
I did like all of them, so
yeah,
it was cool.
So we'll be doing 1984 first. I'm looking forward to that. All right. Good night, Phoenix.
Night night.